This is my true story. I worked every single day in the rain so my son could eat, learn, and live a better life than I ever had. I walked miles with wet shoes and tired bones, thinking one day he would protect me the way I protected him. But when my hands grew weak and my hair turned gray, he called me a burden. He said I needed help, and left me locked inside a mental care home. That day, I stopped being a father and became something else. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe right now. I woke up every morning before the sun. The sky was still dark, the air heavy with rain, but I went to work anyway. The streets were empty except for the sound of my shoes splashing through puddles. My coat was thin, my body cold, but I didn't stop. I carried heavy sacks, fixed broken roofs, cleaned roads, and lifted crates for other men who never even learned my name. I worked for hours without rest, sometimes without food. My hands stayed cracked, my back stayed bent, and my feet stayed wet. Every coin I earned went into the same tin box, the one I kept hidden under the bed. That box wasn't for me. It was for my son. When he was small, he used to wait by the door for me. I would come home soaked, mud on my clothes, hands trembling from the cold. He would run to me, laughing, and I'd forget how tired I was. I used to tell him, "One day, you won't have to struggle like this." He didn't understand, but I meant every word. I wanted him to go to school, wear clean shoes, eat 3 meals a day, and never feel the hunger I grew up with. So I worked harder. I worked when my legs hurt. I worked when my back screamed. I worked through storms and through sickness. There were nights when the rain never stopped. I walked home under lightning, my umbrella broken, the road slippery and dangerous. Sometimes I thought about quitting, but then I'd remember his face, sleeping peacefully under the roof I paid for. That was enough to keep me going. Every blister, every wound, every sleepless night felt worth it, if it meant he'd never have to live like I did. I gave up my dreams so he could have his. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't go out with friends. I didn't save for myself. Every time I looked at that tin box, I felt proud. It wasn't money I was saving. It was his future. When he got older, I paid for his education. I took extra shifts, worked longer hours, and even borrowed money just to make sure his fees were paid on time. I skipped meals so he could have books. I remember watching him leave for college one morning. Clean shirt, polished shoes, head held high. I stood by the door long after he was gone, soaked in rain, but my heart felt warm. I told myself that all the pain, all the sacrifice, all the years in the storm had led to that moment. He was my reason to keep going. But life has a cruel way of turning love into loneliness. When he moved to the city, his calls became fewer, his visits shorter. I told myself it was because of work, because he was busy building his life. I didn't want to believe the truth, that he had already started to forget where he came from. Still, I never complained. I kept working, even when my knees began to ache and my eyesight blurred. I wanted to keep something aside for him, for his children, for the family that would carry my name. Years passed. My hair turned white. My hands shook when I tried to lift even a bucket of water. The rain still came every season, and I still went out in it. People asked why I didn't stop, why I didn't rest. I told them I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I was sure my son would be okay. Every father has one dream, to see his child happy, no matter the cost. And I paid every cost there was. When I finally retired, I thought peace had come. I thought my son would take care of me, visit often, maybe bring his children around. I thought I could finally rest and watch the rain from the window instead of working under it. But I was wrong. The man I raised with love and labor would soon show me how cold a heart can grow when it forgets who kept it beating. It started small. Little things that didn't seem cruel at first, just distant. He stopped calling as often. Weeks would pass without a single word. When I called him, his voice always sounded busy, distracted, like every minute spent speaking to me was a minute stolen from something more important. I told myself it was normal. He had work, responsibilities, a life of his own now. I tried not to feel the sting in my chest every time the call ended faster than it began. I convinced myself that this is how children grow, They leave, they build, they forget a little. I thought it was natural. But then the visits stopped. Festivals came and went. I would cook his favorite meal, set 2 plates, and wait. The food would go cold, the candles would burn low, and I would eat alone. He would call days later, saying something came up. I told him it was fine, but it wasn't. Each excuse took a piece of me with it. I started counting the lies without realizing it. Work meetings, traffic, dead phone battery, always something, always nothing. When he did visit, he came with impatience. He would look around the small house like it was too old for him, too simple for his new life. He stayed glued to his phone, replying to messages, barely speaking to me. Once, when I tried to show him the small garden I'd planted, he said he didn't have time. The words weren't sharp, but they cut deep. Love doesn't die in an instant. It fades quietly, like paint left too long in the sun. That's how it was with us. Every visit, every silence, every sigh. It all chipped away at what we once were. I noticed the change in his eyes. There was no warmth there anymore, only tolerance. Like I was someone he had to deal with, not someone he loved. He began sending money instead of time, as if a few bills could replace conversation, care, or company. He called that help. But I never wanted his money. I wanted his presence, his voice, his hand on my shoulder like when he was a boy. Instead, I got transactions, cold, digital, empty. I stopped cashing them. I wanted to see if he would notice. He didn't. Months turned into years. My body weakened, my hands trembled when I tried to pour tea, and my memory started to fade. I kept telling myself he'd come one day, just walk through the door and say, "Dad, I missed you." But life doesn't repeat itself for old men. It only moves forward, whether you're ready or not. Then the signs became harder to ignore. When I called, sometimes he didn't even answer. Once, I heard him tell someone in the background that I talked too much, that I was getting old and forgetful. The words stung, but I stayed silent. I learned that silence is easier than heartbreak. Every time he visited, he came for shorter and shorter stays, 15 minutes, 10, sometimes less. He started bringing his wife, who looked at me with polite pity, not warmth. I could see it in her eyes. She didn't want to be there. The last time he came before everything changed, he looked at me differently. Not like a father, like a responsibility. I saw it in the way he sighed, the way his jaw tightened when I spoke too long. That's when I knew. He didn't see me as family anymore. He saw me as work. That night, I sat on the porch while the rain fell softly on the roof. I thought about all those years I had walked through storms to feed him, to build a life for him, to protect him from every pain I could. And now, all I could think about was how love turns cold when comfort replaces struggle. I should have stopped giving long ago. Maybe then he would have learned what things cost. But I didn't stop. I kept loving him even as he drifted farther away, until one day he made sure the distance was no longer emotional, but physical. The day he drove me to that place, pretending it was for my own good, I realized something every father eventually learns too late. Sometimes the ones you raise are the ones who bury you while you're still breathing. It was a Sunday morning, quiet and gray. I remember the sound of rain hitting the window when he arrived. He smiled politely, not warmly, and said he was taking me to see a doctor. I didn't question it. My body had been weak, my knees hurt more than usual, and my thoughts often wandered. I thought maybe he wanted to help. I dressed slowly, buttoning my old shirt, combing my thin white hair, and putting on the same shoes I had worn to work for years. The soles were worn down, but I didn't mind. Those shoes had seen everything, the rain, the struggle, the years I gave him. I didn't know they were about to walk me into the last trap of my life. The car ride was long and silent. He didn't play music. He didn't talk much either. I tried to start small conversations, asking about his work, his wife, if everything was going well. He nodded, gave short answers, eyes fixed on the road. I didn't notice the way he gripped the steering wheel tighter each time I spoke. I thought maybe he was stressed, maybe he just needed some rest. I had no idea what was really happening inside his mind. When the car finally stopped, I looked out the window and saw a large white building surrounded by tall trees. The sign near the gate read something I didn't understand right away. Care home. I thought we were visiting someone else. But when he opened the door and told me to step out, my stomach sank. The air was too still. There were people walking slowly in the garden, wearing pale clothes, their faces lost and distant. Nurses moved between them like shadows. Something about the place felt wrong. I asked where we were. He said, "You'll be safe here." His voice was flat, rehearsed. I thought I misheard. Safe? Why would I need to be safe? I turned to look at him, searching his face for warmth, for explanation, for anything that made sense. But his eyes avoided mine. He held the car keys tightly, as if afraid I'd take them. He said it again, quieter this time. "You'll be safer here." A nurse came forward with a clipboard, smiling like she had done this 1,000 times before. She said my name. I didn't understand how she knew it. My son handed her some papers. They spoke quietly while I stood there, confused, cold, the drizzle still falling around us. Then he turned to me and said he had to leave for work but would visit soon. I nodded slowly, still trying to understand. He gave me a quick pat on the shoulder. Not a hug, not even a proper goodbye. And then he walked away. The sound of his shoes on the wet pavement grew softer until it disappeared. I stood by the gate, watching his car drive off. The red tail lights blurred through the rain, and for a long time, I waited for them to come back. But they didn't. The gate closed behind me, the nurse guiding me gently inside. I looked around, white walls, clean floors, the faint smell of medicine in the air. The people inside spoke softly, some not at all. The windows were barred, the doors locked. I realized then where I was. It wasn't safety. It was storage, a place for people who were inconvenient to love. That night, I lay in a narrow bed with thin sheets and listened to the rain outside. I had spent half my life working under that same sound, but it never felt this lonely. I thought about the road home, about the chair by my window, about the tin box under the bed that still held his name carved into it. I wondered if he had thrown it away after all I gave. I closed my eyes and whispered his name once into the dark. The walls didn't answer. Only the rain did, steady, cold, and endless. That was the night I stopped being his father and became his forgotten duty. The man who worked in the rain every day to feed him was now left behind, labeled, boxed, and silenced. And as the rain continued, I realized something bitter, that even storms end faster than betrayal. The room they gave me was small, square, and white, the kind of white that doesn't feel clean, just empty. There was a single bed with thin metal bars, a chair by the wall, and a window with thick glass that barely opened. I could see a patch of sky through it, but not much else. The walls hummed faintly at night, the sound of machines and vents whispering through the building. Every room looked the same. Every hallway smelled of medicine and disinfectant. Time didn't move here. It just stood still, heavy and quiet, like the air itself had given up. The nurses were kind enough, but their kindness wasn't real. It was the kind you learn from training, not from care. They smiled because it was part of their job. They called me sir because they didn't know my name meant something once. Every morning they brought me pills in a small cup and told me they would help. I never asked what they were for. I just swallowed them because refusing didn't change anything. It was easier to obey than to remember that I didn't belong there. I spent most of my time sitting by the window. From there, I could see the garden, a few trees, a stone path, and old people walking slowly in circles. Some of them talked to themselves. Others just stared at the ground. I wondered if they were all like me, forgotten, left behind by someone who once said, "I love you." Maybe every person here had a story like mine, just told in different words. The building was quiet, but if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echoes of those stories. Faint, tired, and unfinished. In the evenings, the light from the window turned soft and orange. I would sit and watch the rain fall over the garden, each drop sliding down the glass like the hours sliding off my life. That was my new world. A bed, a chair, a window, and waiting. Always waiting. I waited for his footsteps in the hallway, for the door to open, for the sound of his voice saying he made a mistake. But the days became weeks, and the weeks became months, and no one came. Not a letter, not a visit, not even a message. The staff said I was lucky. They said some families never even call. I nodded, pretending their words didn't hurt. But every night, when they turned off the lights and the halls went silent, I felt the truth pressing against me like a weight I couldn't lift. I wasn't lucky. I was abandoned. The man who once worked in the storm now lived in one built of silence. Sometimes I would dream of my old house, the smell of wet earth after rain, the chair by the door, the soft sound of my son's laughter when he was small. I would wake up with tears on my face and realize I had been smiling in my sleep. The memories were the only thing that still had color in this gray place. They were both a comfort and a curse, reminders of a life that no longer existed. One night, a nurse came to check on me and asked why I always sat awake so late. I told her the truth in one line. Because I'm waiting for my son. She didn't know what to say. She smiled softly and walked out. I could tell she had heard it before. That sentence must live in every hallway here. As the months passed, my reflection in the window began to change. My shoulders slumped, my hair grew thinner, and my eyes lost their light. I began to feel like a ghost sitting in a room built for the forgotten. But deep inside, something stubborn still lived. Something that refused to die no matter how many quiet nights passed. It was the same thing that once made me work in the rain. The same thing that had carried me through storms. Hope. And though I didn't know it then, that hope would soon turn into something colder. Not rage, not madness, but purpose. Because every man who's been left behind eventually stops waiting and starts remembering what he's capable of. It happened one afternoon when the rain was steady and slow, falling against the window like a heartbeat. The nurses were changing shifts, voices echoing faintly down the corridor. I was sitting on the bed, staring at the wall, thinking about how strange it felt to live a life where silence was your only company. That was when I heard two of them talking outside my door. They didn't realize I was listening. Their voices were low, but the words reached me clearly. They were talking about my son. They said he had been promoted again, that he worked in a tall glass building in the city, that he drove a new car and was doing well. One of them laughed and said, he told people his father went mad, that he had to take care of him for years before sending him here. The words landed like a knife. I sat still, my fingers tightening around the edge of the blanket. Mad. That's what he told them. That I had lost my mind. That he had sacrificed everything to care for me. Lies so clean that they almost sounded noble. The man I fed, the boy I protected from hunger and storms, had turned me into a story that made him look kind. I felt something inside me break, but it wasn't anger. It was a quiet, heavy sadness that settled deep in my chest. I looked at the window and saw my reflection staring back, old, tired, invisible. Maybe he really thought I was mad. Maybe that made it easier for him to forget what he had done. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the rain and the hum of the machines in the hallway. My thoughts drifted back to the days when I had worked under the same kind of rain, my hands blistered, my back bent. Every drop of water that fell on my skin back then had meant something. Progress, sacrifice, love. But now it just sounded like laughter, distant and cruel. I turned to the wall and whispered into the dark, not for anyone else to hear, just for myself. He forgot the man who built him. The next morning, while cleaning staff moved through the rooms, I noticed a cart parked outside with a pile of newspapers and letters. I wasn't supposed to touch them, but curiosity pushed me. I picked one up, a business magazine. On the cover was a photo of a company award event, and there, smiling under the bright lights, was my son. The caption read, Regional Manager, honored for excellence and social responsibility. My stomach tightened. Social responsibility. He had lied so deeply that the world rewarded him for it. I turned the pages slowly, and in the article, they described him as a man who selflessly cared for his mentally ill father. They even printed my name, turned into pity on a page I never asked to be part of. I closed the magazine quietly and placed it under my mattress. I didn't cry. Not this time. Something inside me went still, like the world had finally shown me everything I needed to see. Later that day, I asked one of the nurses what company he worked for. She told me offhandedly, reading it from a file, the same one I had just seen in the magazine. I nodded, pretending not to care, and thanked her. When she left, I wrote the name down on a small torn piece of paper from an old medication leaflet. I folded it 3 times and slid it under my pillow. I told myself I would remember it. And I did. Every night before sleeping, I touched that paper and whispered the name quietly to myself, over and over, until it burned into my memory. Days passed, then weeks. But that small piece of paper became my anchor. The world had left me behind. My son had buried me in lies. But I still had that one truth in my hands: his company, his name, his empire built on deceit. I began to think of ways to reach it, to reach him, not with anger, but with truth. I didn't know how yet, but I knew the day would come. And on that day, when I finally found a way to make a single phone call, he would understand what madness really looks like. Not in the mind, but in the silence of a man who remembers everything he gave and everything he lost. It was a gray morning, the kind where even the light felt tired. Breakfast had been served, the same bland porridge and weak tea they gave us every day. I sat by the window, watching drops of rain crawl down the glass, slow and heavy, like time itself was dragging its feet. The nurses moved through the hall with soft voices and quick steps. I had learned their patterns, their routines, their breaks. That morning, one of them forgot something: a phone. It was left on a visitor's table near the corner of the lounge, small, black, and humming faintly. I stared at it for a long time. I waited until no one was watching. My hands shook slightly as I stood, more from age than fear. I walked toward the table slowly, the shuffle of my slippers blending with the rain tapping against the windows. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. The screen lit up. For a second, my own reflection stared back at me, pale, thin, unrecognizable. I hesitated. My heart was beating faster than it had in years. Then I remembered the piece of paper under my pillow, folded and refolded until the edges had softened. I walked back to my room, closed the door quietly, and sat on the bed. I pulled out the paper and unfolded it with care. His company's name and number stared up at me, the same company that had called him a hero for locking away his father. My thumb trembled as I dialed the number. The ringtone felt endless. When the voice on the other end finally answered, I asked calmly for his boss. The woman paused, then transferred the call. My breath slowed. Every sound in the room seemed to fade: the rain, the footsteps outside, even the creak of my chair. A man answered. His voice was firm, professional. I introduced myself. I said my name clearly, the same name that had once been printed in that magazine as a tragedy. There was a pause. He recognized it. I could hear it in his tone. He asked how I was. I ignored the question. I told him I needed to speak plainly and that I wouldn't take much of his time. Then I began. I told him everything, slowly, without anger, without tremor. I spoke about my years of work, the sacrifices, the lies my son had told about me. I told him how he had faked records, stolen funds from company accounts, and built his reputation on deceit. I explained how he had created false charity reports using my name, claiming to care for me while using that story to gain sympathy and approval. Every word was clear, measured, and true. I had spent months gathering it all in memory, every number, every story, every detail I had overheard. The man on the other end said nothing for a long time. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard, papers being moved, something being verified. Then, quietly, he said, "I believe you." Those 3 words didn't make me proud, they just made me still. I thanked him, told him I needed nothing, and ended the call. I sat there for a moment, staring at the phone resting in my palm. The rain outside was steady, stronger now, as if the sky itself was washing something away. I placed the phone back on the table in the lounge before anyone noticed. No one saw me. No one suspected a thing. The day went on as usual. Lunch came, pills were handed out, lights dimmed in the evening. To everyone else, I was just another old man staring out the window. But inside, something had shifted. The silence that had followed me for years was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty. That night, I didn't dream. I didn't toss or turn. I slept like someone who had finally closed a door that had been left open too long. I didn't know what would happen next, when or how, but I knew the call had already begun to move things far beyond that white room. I had made one call, spoken the truth, and left the rest to time. I had spent my life working under the rain for him. Now it was his turn to stand beneath a storm he couldn't escape. The hours after that call felt slower than any day I'd ever lived. The world outside my window was gray again, the rain soft but constant, like it had decided to stay for good. I sat in my chair by the window, watching each drop slide down the glass, breaking apart at the bottom and starting again. That sound had followed me my whole life. The rain on tin roofs when I worked in the fields, the rain on the factory floor, the rain outside the care home. It had always meant one thing: survival. But that day, it sounded different. It wasn't a burden anymore. It was peace. The nurses walked past my door, their shoes squeaking faintly against the clean white floors. They didn't notice anything different about me. I looked the same, quiet, tired, harmless. But inside, something had gone still, like the eye of a storm. I didn't pace or worry. I didn't wonder if I had done the right thing. I had lived my life doing right, working, giving, enduring. And all it had earned me was a small white room and the title of crazy. This was not revenge. It was balance, the world correcting itself at last. I didn't tell anyone what I had done. The secret sat in my chest like a small flame, warm but silent. I went about my day as usual, ate the same tasteless food, swallowed the same pills, sat by the same window. But now, every sound felt sharper. I heard the rain, the wind, the hum of the machines, all of it clearer, as if the world was finally paying attention again. At night, when the nurses made their rounds, I lay still and pretended to sleep. But I was wide awake, thinking about him. I imagined him at his desk, the phone ringing, his boss calling him into a meeting. I could picture the look in his eyes, the confusion first, then the dread. I had spent years wondering how he could forget me so easily. Now I wondered how he would remember me when everything started to fall apart. Days passed. The rain kept coming, as if the sky itself was stuck in memory. I watched the same tree outside the window lose its leaves one by one. The garden below looked deserted now. Some of the old men who walked there were gone, moved to other rooms, maybe to other worlds. Time didn't move normally in this place, but even inside that stillness, I could feel something changing. One afternoon, a nurse came to me with a letter. She said someone had called to confirm I was here. Her voice trembled slightly when she said it. She didn't know who it was. I took the letter in my hands, but it was blank inside, a notice from the administration, nothing more. Still, my hands didn't stop shaking. I smiled faintly and thanked her. The world had begun to stir. That night, I sat in the dark with the window open just a crack. The air smelled like wet earth, the same smell that used to cling to my clothes after work. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the rain fill the room. Each drop felt like a memory, every step I took in the storms of my youth, every hour I had given away for him. Now, the rain was falling for me. The next morning, I woke to a quiet sky. The rain had stopped. The air was clear and sharp. I sat up slowly, my body aching but my mind calm. There was no more fear left in me. I had done what needed to be done. Whatever came next was no longer in my hands. I had carried too much for too long. Now, the weight was his to bear. As the day went on, I watched the clouds drift apart, sunlight breaking through in faint golden streaks. For the first time in years, the world looked alive. The silence inside me wasn't empty anymore. It was full of closure, of truth, of quiet satisfaction. I had spent a lifetime working in the rain. Now, I was finally dry. It began quietly, like all storms do. No thunder, no warning, just whispers carried by the wind. A week passed before I heard anything. The nurses were huddled in the hallway, speaking in low voices, and I caught only a few words: scandal, investigation, embezzlement. I didn't need more. My hands rested on my knees, calm and steady. The world outside my window was dry for the first time in weeks, but inside me, it felt like the rain had just begun again. Only this time, it wasn't falling on me. 2 days later, the head nurse came into my room with 2 men I had never seen before. They wore black suits, clean shoes, and the kind of faces that belonged to people who didn't waste words. They asked for me by name. My name, the one that had been erased from my son's life, the one he used as a pity story, was now the reason they were here. The nurse looked nervous, unsure if I was in trouble or not. I wasn't. The men were polite. One of them spoke softly, like he already knew the story. He said they were from the company. Then he said his name, the same name I had once spoken through the phone weeks ago. He thanked me. That was the first thing he said. Then he told me my son had been suspended. His accounts were frozen. The investigation had uncovered everything. The false reports, the missing money, the donations that never existed. He had lied to everyone, investors, co-workers, friends, and now every one of those lies had surfaced. The company was pressing charges. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just sat there, my hands folded neatly, and nodded once. They gave me papers to sign, witness statements, confirmation of what I'd said during the call. My handwriting shook, but my mind didn't. I signed slowly, pressing the pen deep into the paper, as if carving each letter into stone. When they left, I sat back in my chair and stared out the window. The same window I had stared through for months, waiting for something to change. Now it had. Outside, the world looked brighter. The garden was full of sunlight. The old men were walking again, some in circles, some sitting on benches, all of them unaware that in one small office miles away, the world of a proud, selfish man was collapsing. I imagined the scene. My son sitting behind his desk, his phone ringing non-stop, his face pale, his hands shaking as security officers stood waiting. I could almost hear the sound of his voice cracking when they told him it was over. For years, I had been silent. For years, I had lived under his choices, his words, his labels. But now, silence had spoken louder than any shout ever could. I didn't need to see his fall. I didn't need to hear his apology. Knowing was enough. That evening, I went to the dining hall for dinner. The other residents spoke softly as usual. No one knew what I carried inside me, that quiet, heavy satisfaction of justice finally arriving. I ate slowly, savoring every bite. For the first time in a long time, the food didn't taste like metal. It tasted like peace. The next morning, the nurse came running into my room, breathless. She said my son was outside. I stood up carefully, adjusting my shirt, combing my thin white hair with my fingers. My heart didn't race. I wasn't scared or angry. I was calm. When I stepped into the hall, I saw him, standing near the entrance, his clothes wrinkled, his face drawn and pale. His eyes were red, not from pride this time, but from loss. He looked smaller than I remembered. The man who once called me a burden now looked like a child who had lost his way. He tried to speak, but his voice broke before the words came out. I stopped walking. I didn't need to go closer. The silence between us was enough. For years, he had left me surrounded by walls. Now, he stood inside walls of his own making. As the nurses looked on, unsure of what to do, I turned away. I didn't need to hear his excuses. I had already heard everything I needed. The truth. The storm that had followed me all my life had finally changed direction. And as I walked back to my room, I realized something. When life takes everything from a man, it also gives him something rarer. The strength to end a story on his own terms. He came again the next day. I heard his footsteps long before I saw him. Hesitant, uneven, the walk of a man who has nowhere left to go. The nurses whispered his name as he passed. Even they knew who he was now. Not the proud son with a fine job and a big car, but the man who betrayed his father and lost everything for it. I didn't stand up when he entered. I stayed in my chair by the window, where I had sat every day since he left me here. The sunlight hit the floor in quiet patches. I didn't turn to look at him. I wanted him to feel the silence he had given me for years. He stood there for a while without speaking. When he finally did, his voice was low, hoarse, broken. I could hear the weight of sleepless nights in it. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know what else to do. His words trembled, spilling out faster and faster. But I didn't answer. The air between us was thick, not with anger, but with history. The kind of history that never fades. I kept my eyes on the rain starting to fall again outside the glass. I thought about how many storms I had worked through for him, and how many I had survived alone. This one didn't scare me. He told me he had lost everything: his job, his money, his house. The company had pressed charges, and the world that once clapped for him now spit his name like poison. He said his wife had left, that friends had stopped answering his calls. I stayed still. He wept openly now, shaking like a child. His tears hit the floor, but they made no sound. For years, mine had done the same. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I let him drown in the quiet. It wasn't cruelty. It was truth. Silence was what he had taught me. The silence of unanswered letters, of birthdays forgotten, of visits that never came. Now, he was hearing it for the first time. I wanted him to feel how long silence lasts when it's earned. He sank to his knees, the sound of his sobbing mixing with the rain outside. I remembered all the times I had knelt like that, in mud, in factories, under leaky roofs, in storms that tore through the night, just to earn enough to feed him. I had done it with pride, not shame. But watching him now, I saw something I never expected. He wasn't proud. He wasn't strong. He was empty. His success had always been built on sand, and now it had washed away completely. He begged me to come home with him. He said he would take care of me now. But home was gone. Not the house, the feeling, the trust, the bond. You can rebuild walls, but not what's broken between them. I stood slowly, walked to the window, and looked at the world outside. The rain had eased, leaving puddles that reflected the gray sky. I saw my reflection in the glass, older, thinner, but free. For the first time in years, I felt light. I turned slightly toward him. Our eyes met. His were red and desperate. Mine were calm. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. He understood everything in that look. The years I had given, the pain I had carried, the justice that had finally arrived. He bowed his head, shoulders trembling, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he left. When the door closed, I sat down again. The sound of the latch clicked softly, like a full stop at the end of a long sentence. Outside, the clouds began to clear. A thin line of light touched the garden, making the wet leaves shine. I watched it for a long time, feeling my chest rise and fall with quiet peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad either. I was finished. The man who had once been buried under guilt and rain had finally risen. My son had learned the lesson that life had refused to teach him, that cruelty returns home, just like storms return to the sea. I had worked in the rain every day to feed him. He had left me to rot in silence. But now, the silence was his to keep. The days after his visit passed differently. The air felt lighter, as if the building itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. The nurses still came and went, the same footsteps, the same pills, the same careful smiles. But something inside me had changed. I no longer looked at the door waiting for anyone. I no longer searched the window hoping to see his car pull in. The part of me that had waited all these years was finally gone. What replaced it wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore. It heals. I began to walk again, slow and steady, down the garden path outside my window. The rain had stopped for good. The ground was soft beneath my shoes, damp but warm from the morning sun. I looked up at the sky, pale blue, streaked with thin clouds that moved without hurry. I realized I hadn't really looked at the sky in years. I had spent too long staring at floors, walls, and closed doors. Now, there was nothing left to wait for, and that meant I could finally live. Sometimes I thought about the rain, about all those mornings when I used to wake before dawn and step into the storm. I could still feel the sting of the cold on my skin, the ache in my hands, the water soaking through my clothes. Every drop back then had a purpose. It meant survival. It meant love. It meant giving something so someone else could eat. That's what fatherhood was to me, carrying the weight of the storm so your child could walk dry. And I did it every day without complaint. I worked in the rain so he would never have to. But love given without respect becomes weakness in the wrong hands. I didn't see it then. I do now. The boy I raised to be kind learned comfort instead. The man I fed learned to take instead of give. The home I built became a place I was thrown out of. But still, I cannot say I regret it. Because the pain he gave me taught me something my labor never could. That dignity is the last thing a man can lose, and the only thing worth keeping. I sometimes imagine him now, living somewhere small, maybe alone, trying to rebuild what he destroyed. Maybe he remembers me. Maybe he tries not to. Maybe at night he hears the rain on his roof and feels the same ache I once did. If he does, that's enough. Life has its own way of returning lessons, drop by drop. I don't need him to come back. I don't need an apology. I don't need forgiveness. Not from him. Not from the world. The balance has already been restored. I still sit by the same window sometimes, but I don't stare anymore. I just watch the light move across the wall, the shadows shifting with each hour. I keep my hands folded, my mind calm. The world outside goes on, people rushing, cars passing, lives being lived. And I, the old man once left behind, have found peace in being still. The nurses call me quiet. They say I don't talk much. They don't know I've already said everything I needed to say, just not with words. One evening, when the sky turned golden and the smell of wet earth drifted through the open window, I picked up a small notebook and wrote a single line inside. No speeches, no stories, just a truth that belonged only to me. He left me in care. I left him in shame. I closed the notebook, placed it on the table, and poured myself a cup of tea. The steam rose softly, twisting in the light like smoke from a candle finally burned out. I took a sip and smiled faintly. The rain had stopped. The world was quiet. For the first time in my life, I was not working for anyone, not waiting for anyone, not proving anything. I was simply here, free, calm, whole. The man who once labored in storms now rested in sunlight. The son who once left his father behind had learned the cost of forgetting. And so my story ends the way it should, not with noise, but with silence, not with hate, but with peace. I worked in the rain every day to feed him. He left me in a cage, but when the world forgot me, I made one call and the rain finally fell on him.